And a big welcome to our live audience for Digital Health Investor Talk. I'm your host, Stephen Wardell. I'm the managing partner of Wardell Advisors, a digital health advisory firm, and the author of The Future of Digital Health. Wardell Advisors is helping digital health companies address issues around growth, fundraising, trade sales, and strategic alternatives, giving you more options in today's challenging environment. You can follow me on X at Stephen Wardell. Our show today is on the topic of the role of genomics for optimal health. Our guest today is Amri Grammer. Amri is the co-founder and president of Ample Biosolutions, a precision medicine company that uses RNA analytics and predictive AI to manage disease. You can follow her on LinkedIn. This show is being recorded and will be included in my podcast series called the Digital Health Investor Talk Show. Subscribe to our podcast on Apple and Spotify and leave us a review. We have new podcast links for the shows, so make sure you see recent episodes when you subscribe, or you could be subscribing to the old page. This is not investment advice, and we are not investment advisors. The format of today's show is simple. It's 90 minutes long, and for the first 45 minutes, Amri and I will spend talking about the news and the macro picture and other topics, and then we'll focus on our special topic of the day. And we'll be taking your questions throughout the show. If you're live, then you're watching this on LinkedIn, and you can use the LinkedIn comments to send us questions. So welcome to the show, Amri, and why don't you tell us about yourself?
Thanks so much, Steve. I'm the co-founder and president of Ample Biosolutions, a precision health company. I'm a scientist entrepreneur. I was at the NIH during the Human Genome Project. And that really inspired my focus on digital health, genomics, and using AI in a positive way to bring wellness to the general population.
That's great. Thank you. So now we'll move on to our first major topic of the day, which is macro news, which is things like market index levels, inflation, interest rates, jobs, unemployment. And for our audience, you can also, if you see any data you want us to respond to or have any questions for us, you can feel free to ask that in the chat. So I think the big news today is that after going up relentlessly for 18 months, the NASDAQ pulled in 3% today, and it seems to be directly due to missed earnings by Tesla and Alphabet. And the NASDAQ is, in Americans' minds, associated with growth companies, but in more recent years, it's become associated with the biggest 7 tech companies who are heavily weighted in NASDAQ. And when they have a good day, the NASDAQ has a good day. And when they have a bad day, the NASDAQ has a bad day. And so here's 2 of them pulling the NASDAQ down today. We're in earnings season. So the NASDAQ is now at 17.5 thousand. CNBC was calling it the worst day since 2022 for the NASDAQ. I think big picture, from a digital health perspective, what we care about is that the NASDAQ is still way up. That's mostly good. A year and a half ago, the NASDAQ was at 10,000. That means if you had just put your 401k into the NASDAQ 18 months ago, it would be up 75% right now. And everyone would believe that you were a stock trading genius. But as I say, you would have had to have put it in the whole NASDAQ or in those big 7 tech companies, because a lot of the other companies, including digital health companies in the NASDAQ, have not been doing nearly as well. In fact, digital health companies are down, and they're often flat. What this in general means is it means investors are buoyed in general because indices are at high levels. But young digital health companies that want to, say, go public, they have terrible comps. That they're looking at public companies that are digital health that did not benefit, did not go up 75% in the last 18 months. But it does suggest activity and potential high valuations in the public stock market. Then something we like to follow is IPOs. The IPO window is officially closed. Some IPOs do sneak out, and we very much want the IPO window to open. And we want digital health unicorns to be able to go public. And then what happens then is that founders get to go found new companies, and investors who've been in that company for 10 years get to harvest and have a return and put that money into the early cycle of life science innovation. And that can't happen if it's all tied up in unicorns waiting to go public and never able to go public. But we have seen two health technology IPOs. The first is the Waystar IPO, and so what we ideally want is we want high quality companies to go public. We want their stock to go up and stay up. That is what, and if that happens, then market conditions look good. A whole lot of tech companies and biotech companies and digital health companies will IPO. And with the windows closed, that's not what's currently happening. And with Waystar, which is a mature health tech company in revenue cycle management, it IPO'd and it has remained roughly flat. That's good. We'd like it to go up 15% and stay up, but at least it hasn't cratered. And then there's the Tempus IPO. That IPO'd, it pulled in a little bit, it went around a little bit. Now it's back at 39, roughly where it IPO'd. So in conclusion, a couple big companies got to go out as IPOs. This is not enough to open up the IPO window. There have been a couple attempts to open up the IPO window since the start of the year. They were not successful. I think we'll see more attempts to open up, unless we see a market pull in. We're going to see more attempts to open up the IPO window in the fall. And if it did open, that would have a transformatively positive effect on the investor environment. It would be as big as the Fed cutting rates rapidly, which is probably also not going to happen, but we could see the IPO window open. So NASDAQ and IPOs, Emery, any thoughts on these sorts of things?
Well, I want to comment on the NASDAQ. Certainly what you said is true, but I point out companies that go hand in hand with digital health. For example, lab companies like Quest actually had a 3% increase in earnings. And that was after a couple of very hard quarters for them. So I think there are examples like that are very encouraging. I know with fellow CEOs, I attend the Laguna CEO conference every year. We're all very excited about Tempus's IPO and also really how they raise money. You know, they were very successful staying private for a long time, utilizing convertible notes, making partnerships with Google, and then took an opportunity at the right time to go public. So I think overall, compared to the last year and a half for tech companies, it's very encouraging.
That's great. And I remember in January, everyone thought things were so bleak, and they would remain bleak for at least the next 12 months. But I think we were seeing a slightly better environment. I would care. There's a couple of things going on. The first is that the Fed stopped raising rates. So the Fed had raised rates very rapidly to 5%, and it was unpredictable whether it would continue to raise rates. Now we're seeing rates are high compared to the last 10 plus years, but at least the Fed is signaling it's not going to raise rates further. And it might cut rates, probably not in the next few months, unfortunately. Then also, starting about 2 or 3 months ago, I started hearing that in private cancer biotech in New York, there was a lot of funding going on. And this has a contagion effect. If people in digital health are looking around and their neighbors are making a lot of private investments, but digital health is all frozen, and they're sitting around saying, why is it all frozen? Why aren't we making investments as well? So there's definitely been a heating up of investment for companies that have great fundamentals, and also for later stage deals where companies are more de-risked as well. And so that was a positive turnaround that was better than we would have thought at JP Morgan in January, I think. So then no particular
news. Can I jump in for a minute on that?
Yep.
Just want to make a comment of another bellwether that's important for a lot of companies like Ample and Cytoreason that just had an excellent fundraising over the last couple of weeks. And that's the number of new clinical trials that pharma is starting up. This is always a very good sign. There was a real contraction around COVID. Obviously, nobody could go to a site. So I know Ample's business, we have over 10 pharma customers in lupus, now 3 in derm. Cytoreason has made its business on pharma. That's really heating up, and that's a good sign for the market in general. And for digital health, a lot of these trials are using mobile apps, using Aura rings. other monitoring devices to connect an individual living with the disease with the PI and the company. So I'm encouraged by that sign as well.
That's great. That's a great metric to track. And it's not just for companies that derive benefit from clinical trials, but it's of innovation in life sciences in general, and for that matter, for society and for sick people. We would like to see many companies, beginning many clinical trials, and it was very concerning when pharma didn't seem to be able to innovate as much. There's a joke from the era of pharma M&A over the last 15 years, which was that you have like $100 billion pharma company that manages to apply for like one new drug NDA, and another $100 billion pharma company that manages to get about one new drug a year, and they merge, and together they manage to get about one new drug a year.
And that's so true, Steve. And I would add to that I think it's a positive circle of pharma, biotech, and executives from both sides of the fence. We saw the J&J executives that have founded a new company, Arc Bio, that was very well funded. And we also see very good examples of pharma acquiring small companies and getting a chance not only for drug candidates, but pharma is starting to acquire technologies. For example, Merck acquiring Prometheus was good for all of us last year. That was not only a platform company in proteomics, but in autoimmune disease. And really, Prometheus, a lot of the founders were some of the originators in digital health across disease areas. So I'd say there are a lot more metrics besides NASDAQ. I wish I had put my 401k in there 18 months ago, but hindsight is 2020, as they say.
So to conclude this section, I'll just mention that there's no news from the Fed, in the last couple of weeks. But the big story from the Fed is just that Powell had initially talked about cutting rates a couple times this year. Then he said inflation is still too high. We can expect rates to be higher longer. And people are now predicting no rate cuts by the end of the year. That's intrinsically disappointing, but he's talking about stasis, and that stability is actually good compared to the rapid, unexpected rise of rates, the federal funds rates from 0 to 5.25% in a short period of time. That caused enormous uncertainty that we still haven't recovered from in the markets. And so sticking at that federal funds rate is stable. And he also has adopted a pattern of giving notice and then following the notice that he gave, which the markets like as well. So, and the next Fed meeting is July 30th to 31st, so we'll have more to talk about after that. And for our audience, any questions on macro picture? But now we're actually moving on to industry reports. So this is in the last couple of weeks. Have any reports come out that matter, that you thought that they contributed something to the debate that are worth talking about? And for our audience, you're also welcome to throw reports and findings from reports into the chat. So I didn't see any reports that caused a splash in the sectors that I follow closely. Emery, did you see any reports that came out in the last week or two?
I really haven't seen it.
Okay. So now we're moving on to the section of the show, which is business news and trade journal news, and also the story of the week. And this is in digital health and also the major enterprise sectors of healthcare as well. So I like to cover fundraisers, and big picture, it's still a very tough time. This is still a time of more companies frustrated in fundraisers than being able to raise money. It's a story of more wind downs than of fundraisers. It's a story of exits, of people exiting the industries, companies exiting the industries, products exiting. So it's still a tough time. We're seeing, I'm optimistic. I made a call that we're going to see 25% lift in digital health venture deals by the end of the year. I think that the data is still supporting a turnaround that could lead to that, but it's still a disappointing time. But now I'll cover the biggest story in healthcare. I think the biggest story of the last week was the CrowdStrike shutdown in healthcare delivery computers. So I run a PC. It was unaffected by this. It seems that every PC needs virus protection, and a lot of enterprises chose CrowdStrike virus protection. And this is especially true if you're in a highly regulated industry, because if you're in a highly regulated industry, it means you have security audits, and the auditors come by and say, do you have a good virus protection program? And then if you say, I have CrowdStrike, then they check that box, move on, and there's no expensive conversation that happens after that. So people adopt CrowdStrike. And then we apparently have a real goof up of CrowdStrike that managed to insert code on people's computers that crashed them. And this affected, and people are still being affected who are traveling. It's very serious. But this affected hospitals having a blue screen of death on key nursing computers. This affected airlines having PCs. And apparently, you need to have a pretty trained IT person go up to your computer, boot it up in safe mode, delete a line of code, and then restart it. And likely it will work. But not just anyone can do that. Not everyone has access to those computers. You need someone who has access to do this. And so you have IT professionals. This is their best. This is the best of times and the worst of times to be an IT professional. Are going around computer to computer to computer, doing this to get them back working again. And in a healthcare context, we've seen this before with blackmailing attempts. So I don't know if our audience knows this, but there have been successful blackmailings of hospitals. And this is awful, where some hackers access the hospital and then they encrypt the hospital's records. They may also steal the hospital's records as well. And then the next morning, people show up to work, they can't access critical records. This could be catastrophic. And then the hospital administrators get a message that says, pay us $100 million in Bitcoin, and we will give you the code to decrypt this stuff that we've encrypted. And it could be even worse than that. And so I've heard of this happening at hospitals. Sometimes they pay the ransom, which then super empowers criminals to go do it again if they do this. But they're really in a tough situation, the hospitals. And then meanwhile, staff is reduced to walking around handing each other paper forms. And usually they don't have good, up-to-date, adequate photocopies of paper forms as well. And so the alternative to people don't like EMRs. It turns out that the alternative to EMRs is the sneaker net, which is worse. So that's and it showed this lesson, if there is any, is that we are vulnerable. We're vulnerable in our airlines. We're vulnerable in our healthcare. We're vulnerable in the finance industry. These were regulated industries that needed to prove they had great antiviral software. Anyway, but the hospitals are vulnerable to this, and bad things happen. Care is interrupted. Oftentimes, payment is interrupted. Payment of professionals for their work, etc. So, Emery, any thoughts on that? And do you have a story of the week?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts. It really has to do with common sense. I have a small company. Learned the hard way a few years ago when one of our big cloud providers didn't protect us against a hack from overseas. The firewall that our personal IT had installed in all of the computers and all of our systems did. And so we have a couple of very basic things. One, we have no automatic updates. You have to manually accept updates on every computer. And also we have a layer of security between our computers and our systems and the outside world. Now, granted, I'm a company of 20 people. It's a lot harder if you're a company of 20,000 or 200,000. But I think this event has really elucidated the need for common sense and logic in having boots on the ground individuals that are responsible for taking care of the individual computers, servers, enterprise systems, and to take responsibility each for our own computer and system as well as systems. I think it also highlights really the topic of today, which is the general public, and for good reason. Congress has been in discussion about AI, black box AI, where the algorithm is not disclosed, which personally I don't understand how we even got in a place where that everything we do is white box. But what paralyzed all the systems you mentioned in our country was a software update that was initiated by one individual. So, I think the bottom line is just thinking about what we do every day, common sense, not relying on other people to take care of things that, if your computer doesn't work, your workers are dead in the water. Your communication to not only your workers, but also friends and family can be compromised. And importantly, when healthcare comes into play and lives are at stake, now we're at a red alert type of seriousness.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I work in a small office environment as well. And something this is saying to me is that my backup, among other things, is that I keep my older computer around. So I have a fully functioning work computer that's 1 year old, and then I have another fully functioning computer that's 3 years old. Um, and then down the road, I'm gonna get a new computer, and then I will keep the second oldest, and I may pass on the third oldest in some way. And so that means that if my computer goes down, I'm not in a situation of necessarily having to fix my computer. I just open the second computer, um, and so and then I think this could even now argue make one a PC and one a Mac, and it could even argue for have a different virus protection. So yeah, if you have two PCs, they come with Windows Defender. So that's the default choice. Unless someone makes a different choice for you, you're going to use Windows Defender. Maybe you want to make that different choice and have one run Windows Defender and one run a different one. And this is actually, I think, intriguingly, the opposite of security is not insecurity. Sometimes the opposite of security is efficiency. The most efficient solution it doesn't have safeguards. And making things robust makes them inefficient, maybe. So it's like a tax, like a cost you have to pay or something. So
And those are all good points. I think diversity, whether it's people, data, machines, is all very important. We're very similar. I actually have a backup computer that's ready to go at every moment as well. Could have switched it out at a moment's notice if we had a problem with this computer for the interview. This is also very important in data or AI predictions. We read about this, that, truly predictions are only as good as the data going into them. And a lot of the early AI models were based on very homogeneous data. So my takeaway from this is personal responsibility, being aware of what you need every day to communicate with your friends and family and also your work colleagues, and diversity, different types of computers, different types of software, backup plans, just like the go bag that we all heard about, during COVID, and having, a couple weeks worth of food and water available in case of a natural disaster. Thinking about that with our electronic devices, because they're such an important part of our life, as you point out, is mission critical.
yeah, another level of that is that I think when you think of the executive computer setup, first executives had tower desktops, and then laptops began being provisioned, and then executives had the tower desktop in their office, and then there was the laptop was in a drawer or something. And then when you took your once a month business trip, you take your laptop out and put it in your bag. Then laptops got to be just as good or overpowered for even a desktop environment. So people said, why would I ever have two PCs? I'll just have a laptop, and then when I go home at night, I'll take my work. I used to VPN in from home. Now I take my work laptop home, and I bring my work laptop back in the morning, and I take it on my business trip, and I have just this one laptop. And now I think maybe it should go back to I have a desktop at work, and I have a laptop for travel and for home, because then I always have two PCs that are up to date. And so I come in the morning, and my work desktop is totally frozen and inoperable. Doesn't matter. I had a two PC setup provisioned by my work. I think our listeners, what they're taking away from this is now I can ask my boss for a Mac. I think that's the
Well,
our
I'm
listeners.
calling in from a Mac right now. I'm a scientist, and at the NIH, I literally had a PC and a Mac on my desk because I needed very different software for the instruments that I was running. I think another takeaway, and just to close out this topic, is being aware of being connected to the wireless internet. And what do I mean by that? That other device maybe should not be connected to the wireless internet all the time, and you very purposely connect it, because being connected means things are happening to your computer that maybe you're not aware of, and to make sure that you turn on and make sure that you're manually accepting all updates. This is important for phishing and all sorts of other ransomware attacks, as you were talking as well. It's being conscious, being aware. I think, in meditation and mindfulness, it's whatever you do, making conscious decisions, being aware. Don't run on autopilot. When we run on autopilot, like automatic software updates, is when we as a people are most vulnerable.
That's great. Thanks. Well, so that was my story of the week. Did you want to bring up any additional story of the week?
I think really, the awareness, the difference between black box and white box AI, and to bring up, I think, a timely vignette. There's a robot that is named Sophia. They actually met at the Precision Medicine World Conference this year. The booth of the company that owns Sophia was right across from mine. And I see Sophia in the news here and there, giving television news interviews, appearing at the UN, appearing at trade shows. And really, if you interact with a fully functional AI in person, you actually realize that an AI is not equivalent to a human being, and that understanding what is the purpose for the design of the AI, what is the accountability to people that are using the AI is very important. And Sophia is in the news every week or two. I think it's timely. We're all used to seeing, I grew up with Star Trek science fiction shows like Data, and thinking of AIs like Data. Sophia is no Data.
That's great. Thank you. Well, so now moving on to regular news and trade journal stories, I like to focus on fundraisers. So the last couple of weeks were more big fundraisers. This is a surprise. We wouldn't have thought about this 6 months ago. But the first is New York-based mental health platform Headway announced it had secured $100 million Series D funding, doubling its valuation to $2.3 billion. CEO here is Andrew Adams. Spark Capital led the round. That's Will Reed there. So this is great news for the sector all in all. I'm going to assume that this is validating, among other things. So there's a question about whether mental health by phone, by smartphone, whether it works, whether it's profitable. And we don't have the numbers, the inside numbers here. If they're raising $100 million Series D, it's during a tough time when sizzle isn't everything today. That suggests that the company has good fundamentals and that this is working and it's competitive in the marketplace as opposed to bricks and mortar alternatives. So good sign all around. Other things I draw from this is that a lot of VCs, for 2 years now, VCs have been saying there's too much uncertainty. And they've been running numbers and saying that some of the themes they liked in the past, they don't like anymore because at current public company valuation levels, it's never going to be a positive return for them, et cetera. And so here, seeing this company, we're seeing sort of that there are formulas that work for VCs here for them to put another $100 million into Series D funding. Valuation doubled, and so VCs also they've done what's called fleeing to safety. So that often means fleeing to later stage when there's less product risk and when maybe even the company is cash flow positive. We don't know in this case whether this company is cash flow positive, but fleeing to safety. So in a sense, that's what this is. When they go later stage, they not only get safer, but they also get to put more money to work. It's not a $20 million round, it's a $100 million round. So instead of making 5 investments, they make 1 investment. And that's, in a sense, that's a little bit of bad news for young companies. This show is about the innovation economy. We love young companies. We want them to be successful. And so those big companies are soaking up all of the venture capital out there, apparently. So and then I'll bring up a second one, which is Israeli startup Cyto makers of a computational model to map and compare treatments. They announced they had secured $80 million in funding. And this is from Pfizer, Our Crowd, NVIDIA, and Thermo Scientific participated in the round. And Cytoreason offers life science companies AI-enabled tools to gather data-driven and molecular-level insights to improve phase 2 success in clinical trials and optimize research and development. So this is very interesting. This whole idea of computational models to map and compare treatments, I think this fundraise is very validating for that. It's validating because Pfizer invested, so Pfizer wouldn't invest if this was going nowhere. And it's validating in part because NVIDIA invested. I'd like to think NVIDIA has giant bags of cash lying around and they have nothing to do with it. But the obvious place to stick it is in healthcare and life science. That's the obvious place to put it. And because number one, it needs data analytics tremendously and it consumes it tremendously. And number two, it produces incredibly high margin products that are very valued by society. 2 big fundraisers. Any thoughts on either or both of these?
Well, I think both are very exciting. I mentioned Cytoreason earlier in the program, just one of many examples of pharma not only putting dollars into a lot more clinical trials, but both funding and acquiring companies that fuel the technology to actually identify the drugs themselves. You saw the Prometheus acquisition last year by Merck, which is an example of that. And now Pfizer investing in Cytoreason. What's interesting about Cytoreason is that they put together a number of different kinds of technologies to model the immune system in disease. And I think their lead disease is IBD, which affects a very large number of Americans. So I firmly believe in a rising tide floats all boats. So I think Cytoreason's success and Tepes's IPO good for all of us. The mental health company that you mentioned, well, I do see the point that, single investments at high dollars, some people think that takes away from smaller investments. But I think historically that we see when these big investments are being made, there's also a lot of funding of smaller companies. And I will note a mental health delivery company like the one you mentioned really requires a huge amount of money to deliver services. So a lot of digital health and biotech or devices, different software. Certainly we all think it's expensive, but it's not as expensive as actually providing services. So I'm encouraged by both of those stories.
Great, thanks. So a couple more fundraising stories. UK-based Huma. I don't know much about them. They announced they'd secured 80 million in Series D funding. So another big fundraise, this time in Europe. We usually see these really big fundraisers starting in the US and going international, bringing their total raise to 390 million. Investors here include AstraZeneca, Leaps by Bayer, HAT Technology Fund, and Hitachi Ventures. So you do see AstraZeneca and Leaps by Bayer active in the US. I'm not that familiar with HAT Technology Fund or with Hitachi Ventures being active in US digital health. So Huma Cloud is a no-code platform that allows developers to create disease management tools using a library of pre-built modules and device connectivity capabilities. So this is really interesting. Our audience may not know that much about no-code tools, but it's very, very interesting to think that you could view the world of disease as this giant kind of marketplace where many people have many conditions and there's many tools being used to manage it. And this could be as simple as 20 years ago, you were diabetic. You need a notepad that's got forms printed on it that asks you for your blood glucose level or that sort of thing. And it assists you in calculating things, and you can work out, well, I can have dessert, isn't that nice, etc. And then this was converted into digital tools at great expense. And now the next level is to let a much larger community of people build tools for disease using no-code tools for software development. So people have asked what these no-code tools are like, and the interesting thing is that this term no-code is relatively new, but it's basically what WordPress was. So in the old days, people had to literally script a blog from scratch, and the act of writing a blog post, you had to know how to write, and you had to know HTML to write a blog post. And then WordPress came along and made a standard blog format for everyone with add-ins. You can charge people for things. You can ask people to sign up for a mail list. Instead of coding that from scratch every single time, you just click a checkbox and in pop these things on your WordPress blog or whatever. Well, that dramatically increased. You could have someone who was a writer who could now run a business off of a blog without having to learn to code. And so now that's being applied to this marketplace of disease management. I think that's it's tremendous for patients. It's not great for incumbent, companies with tools today because they're subject to being undermined by a dozen new entrants from people who don't have to pay coders and whose strength lies somewhere else. So I like this is an example of no code moving into healthcare.
And Steve, what's the application for human who's familiar with this company?
I'm sorry, I missed some of that.
What is the application for the no code? What area are they in?
So this is disease management tools for patients, and so you have a new disease management tool, a variation on one created by people who can't code. And a particular angle here is that they're able to draw hospital EMR data into the app. So you could have someone who's sick, and then their new tool for dealing with back pain is pre-populated with data from the hospital EMR. They didn't have to go request their record and type it in themselves or something like that. So.
Well, I mean, that's extremely exciting for patients. I know in the autoimmune disease that I work in, lupus, which is extremely difficult to diagnose and even more difficult to manage. It takes 5 years, if ever, to get your disease under control. One of the key things that patients want is ownership of their own record. And what gets in the way of that is making a request, even when you get the data, being able to read it and interpret it. So just from what you've said today, I know nothing about HUMA. This sounds, very exciting. I can relate to, I'm glad you made the analogy of, WordPress and blogs. I remember when I was in college and graduate school, it was the beginning of WordPerfect and Microsoft Word. And I still know all the shortcuts, Control-C, Control-V. I could actually write all the code within my document to make it look like I wanted to. So that's a great analogy for our audience, is just understanding is really a hierarchical way of thinking of data, of being able to simplify tasks so someone without the coding knowledge is being able to do that. Even programs in bioinformatics and machine learning and AI, really it was all in R and Python, and now there are a lot of blocks that you can upload in your computer for very standard algorithms to do simple machine learning and predictive AI without needing to learn code. I see that as positive for the community in general.
Yeah, thank you. And for our audience, any trade journal articles that you want to call our attention to or ask questions about, that sort of thing. And there's a profound observation I heard. This came out of the MIT Entrepreneurship Lab when I was a student there. And it was that oftentimes technology really breaks through when there's a change in user interface. And this is counterintuitive. Like, isn't it doing the math that or making the next chip that caused the breakthrough? Well, actually, it could be the user interface. And so when cell phones went from a tiny screen with a whole bunch of buttons to a big screen, cell phones became a whole lot more useful to us. And so there's many other examples. And another one actually is that 3.5, if you had to be an expert to use GPT 3.5, then they added a chat layer on top of it, which meant that anyone could conversationally type questions. And suddenly they had the fastest selling product in the history of the world. It rose to 100 million users faster than the fax machine or the cell phone or any other prior product. So that change in user interface it was the same AI engine, but now with a new user interface, it became incredibly more useful to people. And then another one, I thought this was just amazing. It's hard to be astonished today. I found the following story astonishing, and that was just that India-based Fitterfly Click has partnered with Google and has announced an app that allows you to take a photo of your meal, and an AI engine will examine portion size, calorie count, macronutrients, and micronutrients. And this is intended for people with diabetes, but I hope it's available to anybody who wants it. And the app is powered by Google Gemini 1.5 Flash. I guess we're all going to have to become familiar with what this means, on Google Cloud's Vertex AI platform. And to work, the app had to become familiar with 37,000 different kinds of Indian food. And they also have loaded international food in there as well. So I hope this is coming to an iPhone near us. Anyway, but I thought that was just interesting and charming. And I could never understand why some people want to take a picture of their meals, but this could get me taking pictures of my meals. It's going to give me that. So anyway, any other?
But can you imagine you're at a restaurant and you ordered something extravagant. Now you take a picture and you have a warning that it's like 70% of your fat calories for the day. But I do think it's encouraging. One trade story that I wanted to bring up, a famous scientist entrepreneur on Monday, Eric Topol, made a post on LinkedIn and also widely on his blog about the importance of what he calls the immunome, which is really how the immune system works and the importance of getting to wellness. And he talked about a number of studies and different predictive AIs and longitudinal tools, both blood sampling and tissue sampling, as well as mobile devices or rings and things like that. So very timely for all of us as humans, but for the show today, where we're really going to dive in deeply into how all of us can get more to wellness, which is low inflammation, and how everything in our daily lives can be used to predict that, including the photography app that you just mentioned.
That's great. So we're drawing up, we need to switch over to the second half of the show soon. So I'm going to skip some sections and then go a little more quickly through other sections. So I think I'm just going to talk about a piece of technology in your life that has made your life dramatically better. And so for our audience also, feel free to throw in something into the chat as well. I'm going to throw in that these days you can actually get, for your phone, you can get a grip that mimics the grip of a DSLR camera. So the one I like is called like the Ulanzi DSLR grip. And so it puts a shutter button in the place where one is on a DSLR camera. It gives you a remote control for your phone. It allows you to hold your phone in one hand with one of those grips that fills up your palm. And so I am using my phone more and more for taking photos, and I hate the way I hold my phone to take photos. I really don't like it. I feel like I'm going to drop it, especially if I don't have a case on it. It feels awkward. But this Ulanzi grip, it actually uses the MagSafe feature of phones. So you just slap on your phone on it and it grips it strongly magnetically. And then it's also takes photos. And then there's more expensive versions that are full of a battery. And so it charges your phone wirelessly through the MagSafe wireless port as well. So really love this. I think I'll take even more photos of my kids in my life with this kind of grip. So, Emery, any piece of technology in your life, and for audience as well, anything in your life that has made your life a lot better?
Well, I mentioned a little while ago, I'll mention it again, and that's the Aura Ring, which, I really like things that help us to become more well in our day-to-day life. I never was a fan of a watch even before we had the Apple Watch. I'm not really good at, wearing something around my neck, or, even on a treadmill, bands you put around your chest. But an Aura ring just looks like a piece of jewelry. It monitors your sleep, your activity. You could do all of these other things, and it's not noticeable. And a lot of companies are interfacing it. It works by Bluetooth, um, to be able to go with blood testing and, other kinds of testing, give you really a big picture of health. And I'll do a shout out. The person that introduced me to Steve, Kroom Lawrence, is also the one that introduced me to the Aura ring. So, Kroom, if you're listening, thanks on both ends.
That's great, thank you. And I have noticed a lot of people love the style of an analog watch. The analog watch. There's one for playing sports. There's one for business, etc. For men, it's not permissible to wear a lot of jewelry, but so the watch is the jewelry, and so therefore they might actually have an Apple Watch. They don't like charging it twice a week. It doesn't give them a lot of style options unless they're like changing the band or something. But they do like a watch, and so if you do that, then you suddenly lose all the step count tracking. You lose. You have a phone, so you're going to get the email notification and the text messaging, but you're going to lose sleep tracking. You're going to lose step count. And so the Aura ring, is the way to add that back, I think. So then next is conferences. So I'll mention a couple conferences coming up. So the first is really interesting. I hadn't heard of this before. I'm hearing a lot of buzz about the Primary Ventures New York City Summit. So this is a venture summit, and there's a couple of things about it. First of all, I looked at past speakers. They have amazing past speakers. Second of all, a number of their amazing past speakers are some of the world's top venture capitalists, and they're not at Primary Ventures. So what is going on here? Was there a mix-up in the invitations or something? This is a proprietary venture capital conference, and they're inviting other VCs to present. Maybe they're the later stage VCs that they pass deals on to or something, but I'm just being a little silly there. And then I looked into this conference, and I know people at Primary Ventures, and then I found out it's invitation only. So suddenly now I have to go to it because it's invitation only.
Do you know who got you the invitation, Steve?
I don't have one yet, but I did have Sam Toole.
You're trying to get one.
Yeah, I did have Sam Toole, who's the digital health partner at Primary Ventures on the show. And so this is in September in New York City. So this is interesting. Usually I only review shows that I've been to and recommend them or not. But these people have managed to. Primary Ventures has been part of the story of the rise of New York City. New York City used to be a clear software second to Boston in healthcare, and now they're the equal of Boston. And together, Boston and New York are the equals of the whole San Francisco Bay Area, which is a good thing. They seem to be having a conference that is giving off a lot of energy in September in New York. Good reason to visit New York. So I would commend to my audience, if you know someone at Primary Ventures, try to get a ticket to that. It's a reason to visit New York, do a bunch of meetings in New York, and then go to their conference as well. So then some others, just a D-Farm at the top. This is in Philadelphia, September 17th to 18th. This is the top conference on pharma clinical research. So if you're a digital health company and you sell into pharma for pharma clinical research, this is a conference to go to talk to customers. There's a limited amount of VCs there, but it's more for buyers to meet with buyers in the industry and to show off if you have something to show off this year. And then Health Tech Con X. So this is coming up in Boston, September 26 to 27. And it seems to be that there are three digital health related conferences that the owner of the conference is throwing together and is calling Health Tech Connex in Boston. So this also clearly indicates that all the good names for digital health conferences were grabbed up years ago, and we're down to Health Tech Connex as a title. But they're bringing together DTX East, That's the Digital Therapeutics Conference, and Virtual First Care, and Evidence-Based Digital Health in Pharma. Those three conferences, instead of having separate conferences in September in Boston, they're all pulling together to be one conference in September in Boston. I think that's a great thing for the industry. DTX East was earned a spot as an outstanding conference for pharma execs and also startups and vendors to go to there. And lastly, people are already talking about Health will be October 20th and 23rd in Las Vegas. It's definitely Health is an investor conference. Every company is raising money, which is everyone should go to this conference. But people have got on their calendars. They're buying the tickets, and so Health remains a sort of a must-go conference. So,
you talk a little bit more about Health. I'm not really familiar with that. So,
sure.
What are the typical attendees? What are the sessions? What are the vendors?
So I think the way to think about this is that there is the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference in January, and that's an investor conference. It's a very unusual and flawed conference because JP Morgan, the investment bank, runs the central conference at the Westin St. Francis Hotel, and they give tickets to their existing banking clients to attend that conference. And then tens of thousands of other people show up in Union Square, San Francisco area and do meetings all the time just because those senior executives are there. So JP Morgan's inviting from companies in healthcare, typically the CEO, CFO, head of investor relations come. Increasingly, the head of corporate development comes to JP Morgan. And then it's an investor conference. That's why it's in a downtown financial area, is because public investors who buy stocks in San Francisco are going 11 blocks to the conference, by cab. They're not flying to a resort location or something. That's an investor conference. A lot of people are very unhappy with that conference. These days, that conference focuses a lot on public biotech. It has nothing to do with digital health software. It's crowded, it's overpriced, it's rainy, and there's no programming if you don't get a ticket to the main conference. And if you do get a ticket to the main conference, the only programming is watching a company give the latest version of its investor deck, a public company give its investor deck. Along came an entrepreneur, Jonathan Weiner. He worked with Oak Health, the venture fund, and he created a very entertaining, fabulous conference focused on all innovation in healthcare. Heavy emphasis on software innovation, but all innovation in healthcare. Early with an emphasis on hospitals and health plans. So software companies that sell into hospitals, software companies that sell into health plans. Rapid expansion from there into software companies that sell into employers, like an Accolade. Also expansion of software companies that sell into the pharma industry, non-FDA cleared stuff. It's very weak on FDA cleared stuff. But it was always from the start focused on the innovation economy and investors. And they tried to, so JP Morgan is not a trade show, and I would say that Health wants to be a trade show, but is not yet a trade show. HIMSS is a trade show. DPharm is a trade show. And its strength is that it gets the investor food chain there. And its weakness is that it's trying hard to bring in the product buyers, the big industry product buyers, and it hasn't quite been successful. So if you see a health plan executive, then you're probably seeing a health plan innovation executive who's a staff, not a line person, and you're not seeing a health plan general plan manager who has the budget to buy your product or whatever. So you're seeing an influencer within the health plan, but you're not seeing a decision maker who will buy your product if you sell software into health plans. So that's Health. It's fun. They made it fun. JP Morgan is not fun, and it's an investor conference, and it's strongest and heaviest in the areas of software companies selling into payers and providers still. But it claims to want to be strong in all areas. So that's it. But any more conferences or that you want to bring up for our audience?
So the biggest, most important conference for our company every year is the International Autoimmunity Conference, the American College of Rheumatology. It's going to be in my hometown of another big city on the East Coast, Washington, D.C. in November. And that's where all of the pharmaceutical companies have their late-breaking abstracts for the clinical trial results in IBD, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, all the things that you see on ads on late-night TV right now. more and more over the last couple of years, really unexpected. A lot of venture capitalists are at that company, looking for companies to fund. A lot of the analysts, a lot of reporters are there. So anything that has to do with autoimmune disease, and that includes digital health, that's a very important conference, and I'm proud that it's on the East Coast this year. A couple of others that I'll mention: an invitation-only conference I've been lucky enough to get invited to for the last 5 years. Brooke Byers, Silicon Valley veteran, runs the Laguna CEO conference. So CEOs of public and private companies focused on testing of all kinds, either blood and biopsy, especially using genomics and predictive AI, are the attendees. And it's always less than 100 people, very much like a retreat atmosphere. So a lot of relationships are formed there. And then the last conference I'll mention, I think almost all Americans, we have to deal with pain at some point in our life. And as we get older, we all have some sort of chronic pain, whether it's osteoarthritis, which is our joints wearing out, some aspect of fibromyalgia. And so there's a small conference actually in Charlottesville, Virginia, the home is Thomas Jefferson, where my company is located, being run by a nonprofit called Relight. They run an international meeting every year. So people come from all over the world, pharma executives, as well as physicians and scientists and companies of all sorts. Topic changes, but this year it's about pain, and really pointing out something that even I didn't understand before I was enlightened, that there's pain that's caused by inflammation, and then there's pain that is nerve pain, and that's neurological. And of course I knew that at a gut level, but I didn't really understand that they're two different sets of pathways. And we really, we can go a long way at blocking inflammation, but we're not very good at blocking any kind of neurological pain. And a study that was just published in my field, lupus, earlier this month, very surprisingly pointed out that 65% of patients with an autoimmune disease, lupus, were receiving opioids or were receiving gabapentin. And so pain is something that we all have to deal with. And I think sometimes physicians are too quick to give out medications that are highly addictive or not well understood, and really need to be looking at the type of pain it is. And maybe a lot of the pain is coming from inflammation, which is definitely the case in an autoimmune disease like lupus.
Very interesting. Yeah, thank you. That's great. Thank you. So now moving on to personal notices here. So first, my next show is with Dr. Gil Blander of Inside Tracker, which is a health optimization and performance and longevity company, digital health company. And he's an expert in the science of aging, and he's giving a talk, Live Long Enough to Live Forever. That will be Wednesday, July 1st. That's next week with Gil Blander. So the next is I'm having one of my Boston Health Innovation Nights coming up. This is Thursday, August 15th. It's at the Intercontinental Hotel Boston on the waterfront, outdoors. And we have AstraZeneca's Dr. Jennifer Joe, and she's talking about how pharma is partnering with digital health companies to advance care. And so then also have a beach party coming up. This is Saturday, August 31st.
This sounds like the most fun, Steve.
Saturday, August 31st. In Marblehead, our speaker is Manolis Kellis. He is an expert he's an MIT professor in biology and AI, and he's talking about 10 steps to end disease. And we have Spark Talks on the beach in Marblehead. And so to apply for that, email me, message me. I'll send you to the website to apply for that beach party. And Amory, any personal notices for you coming up?
I'm sorry, what?
Personal notices? Are you looking to meet people at investors at conferences or things like that?
So Ample is in the middle of a commercialization raise right now, and we're doing it in a convertible note manner, very modeled after Tempest. So we have 3 products that we're funding. Lugene, the blood test, that is in the process of launching this year to predict flares and right drug for the right person. Also, a skin test for psoriasis and a blood test for wellness. So anybody that's interested can go to the website to find out more information.
Great, thank you. So now we'll move on to our main topic. And for our audience, feel free to ask questions of Amri on a topic that she's an expert in. Our topic of the show today is the role of artificial intelligence in genomics for optimal health, detecting inflammation and predicting therapeutic options. And so why don't we just kick off by asking you, what is the role of AI in genomics for optimal health?
So being able to dynamically understand what's going on in our body is critical. We talked about devices like the Apple Watch, the Oura Ring. These are very important for day-to-day sleep, physical activity. Often as human beings, we don't look past the surface, but we really need to be looking in our blood and to be looking in our skin and other organs to understand what's going on every day. So genetics is DNA. That's what we're born with. It's like the library of what could happen. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. And it definitely doesn't mean it's happening right now. What genomics is understanding the dynamic genes that are expressed 20,000 every moment of every day in every cell of our body. That readout is inflammation. What are the drug targets? Now, the amount of information can be overwhelming. Imagine 20,000 light switches in every cell of your body and every moment in time is trillions of pieces of information. So we need some way to process all that information and to make a prediction of next step. This is where complicated math, machine learning, now we're calling it predictive AI, comes in and is very important because the calculations and the predictions needed are far more than algorithms that statisticians use, mathematicians use to be able to understand what's going on. So that's the focus of predictive AI and genomics. Now with that, probably most of our audience thinks of AI, what you mentioned earlier, GPT, chatbot, and it's all about vocabulary. Those are generative AI, large language models, which is very useful for business, law, communication. My phone all the time is suggesting words to me. The bottom line is both generative AI and predictive AI are taking known information, or even the example you gave of the AI looking at what on your plate, and taking information that the AI or the algorithm has gathered to be able to predict what's happening next. I think there's a really important advance in healthcare because it's a key to unlock what has not been possible to date. Even in cancer, it's become quite challenging to be able to predict which drugs will work for individual cancers. And most cancers are driven by a mutation in one gene. Compare that to autoimmune disease, where there are hundreds of genes that you can inherit that give you the tendency to get a disease. But then there are tens of thousands of gene changes over a lifetime that lead to actually having it. So I think we're at a bold step for medicine and for digital health, the integration of these devices we've talked about, whether it's the Oura Ring or a smartwatch with blood and biopsy testing so that doctors and physicians can get ahead of it and to make a plan early in life going forward, or when the unexpected happens, to know what to do about it. My focus lately in bringing up topical news, Eric Topol, others at Stanford, Huberman show, is all about we all have inflammation that we're not even aware of. And if we can be aware that we're in an inflammatory state, but even better, know exactly what's contributing to that, we could do simple things before we get to more complicated things to get us back to wellness. So, for example, just in the last couple of weeks, My company, Ample Biosolutions, in collaboration with a European company in Norway, Aker Biomarine, funded by a New York organization, the Lupus Research Alliance, did a longitudinal study of omega-3 replacement, krill oil. That's a simple thing that all of us could do to reduce inflammation and get us back to wellness.
That's great. Thank you. That's a great overview. So I guess my next question is, you touched on this, but what is inflammation? So I think everyone has had a minor skin infection, and when that happens, it gets red and angry and temperature's elevated, and there's a story about your body is sending in white blood cells and elevating the temperature to fight off this infection. But then I've also heard people in the longevity community say aging is inflammation. And I've also heard that we're all inflamed all the time and don't even know it. This is hard. Suddenly, I thought I knew what inflammation was. I don't think I know what it is anymore. What's inflammation?
Great question. Inflammation touches on all the things that you just reviewed. At its heart, your immune system has a job every day. If you don't have a functional immune system, you're not going to be long in this world unless you're sheltered from all of the microbes. And so your immune system has a role to play to fight off infections. Your immune system has a role to play in wound healing, which you see that when you cut yourself, even if you don't get an infection, it gets red and inflamed. And that's because the skin is doing changes to be able to kind of put it all back together so your skin becomes whole again. Out of control inflammation is what can give us problems. And so in our modern life, we're exposed to a lot of inflammation that we weren't exposed to 50, 100, a couple hundred years ago. Why? The air that we breathe, the food that we eat, the water, all of the things we're exposed to. It's a good thing that we're able to travel, but we saw in COVID how quickly an infectious agent can spread throughout the entire world. So our immune system is important to protect us and plays a role in day-to-day activities like wound healing. But if something goes sideways, your immune system gets confused and starts attacking your body in disease like lupus. That inflammation is harmful. If you have inflammation, really type 2 diabetes is a disease of inflammation. And type 2 diabetes really wasn't that common 50 or 75 years ago. Why is it more common now? It's because of the Western diet, high in carbohydrates. We hear about ultra-processed food, fast food. So that's what inflammation is. The important thing is to be aware and to understand the different kinds of inflammation and simple things we can do every day for longevity to not only live longer, but live healthier, to live in a way that we can enjoy, our older years. I'll pause there for a minute, let you dig in further with questions, and maybe the audience has some questions they'd like to ask.
Yeah. So for our audience, any questions for Amory on these topics around AI and genomics, detecting inflammation, predicting therapeutic options, that sort of thing. So you've said that AI and genomics could help us get closer and achieve optimal health. So what is optimal health? Is it a reduction of inflammation? What else goes into optimal health?
So I'm a scientist at heart, so I would say that the minimal definition is optimal health is low inflammation and good physical health, good physical, activity. How do we get there? And why did I make the statement earlier, which is the title of our show today, is that if you can measure those light switches of genes turned on and off in every cell of your body, they're called RNAs, which is what happens when the DNA opens up and the genes are expressed like light switches. If you can understand what your genomic fingerprint is at every moment in time, then you know what to do about it. Maybe it's simple. Maybe it's the inflammation that comes from eating a Western diet and not having enough omega-3 in our diet. We can do krill oil replacement. There are other supplements like curcumin in clinical trials that have been shown to reduce inflammation. So we could start simple, and then we could get more complicated. Ample's third product is a well-gene blood test that I see being used from college on at your annual physical. It's always good to have some baseline data. We're all at zero or no inflammation at some point in our life. But as we go on into our 30s, 40s, 50s, just natural wear and tear in our body, the different things that we go through, we get into an inflammatory state that expresses itself as inflammation in our blood vessels, which leads to cardiovascular disease, early heart attacks and strokes. It comes out as type 2 diabetes, where our body becomes resistant to insulin, which, is reversible at most stages with, reverse in diet, a reverse in physical activity. And now pharma has given us a panoply of drugs that can even assist us in reversing type 2 diabetes. Why predictive AI? Just going back to think of 20,000 genes being turned on and off in every cell of your body. It's true big data. So much information that we need predictive math to be able to take all of our information that came before and then say, Steve, this is your well gene blood test right now. And by the way, good job with the exercise and all the other things that you've implemented. You're zero inflammation.
Yeah, thank you. And so, by the way, you may be referring to drugs like Ozempic, which is, a runaway bestseller and seems to be having all sorts of direct and indirect effects on society. And it's a fascinating topic. And so, for the last 6 months, I have, at great personal effort, I have done caloric restriction and intermittent fasting and one meal a day, which was very unpleasant and very hard, and I lost some weight. And now I'm very, very concerned that people are going to think I took Ozempic and didn't earn it the hard way.
Well, there are side effects as people talk about the Ozempic face, which you definitely don't have. So I don't think you have to worry about that, Steve.
Now, you've talked about this process, but just to make it real for our audience, it starts with a blood draw or biopsy. It goes to some kind of reading machine, which then creates a large amount of data, genetic data that's born digital, that then is stored and analyzed by analytics that are AI analytics. Can you go a little more in depth here? And what is modern AI adding to this? Because we've done analytics that presumably wasn't AI in the past. And so is AI speeding things up or allowing us to do more with less human labor? Or describe how this process works, how you would understand that someone had more inflammation than was good and might see an opportunity to do something about it.
All great questions, and you have the overview down. I would just say that genomics is RNA, which is dynamic, it changes with time, whereas genetics is DNA, which we're born with, which is what could happen. What's different now? There's standard blood collection tubes. There are then microsampling skin devices where a sample is taken. They're FDA-approved devices, can be sent to a central lab. We use a central lab in California that's very experienced using standard protocols to isolate those genes that are expressed, called RNA, use a machine that just sequences completely every expressed gene in the sample. What's different and unique is that Ample, and we turned 11 years old last week, very proud about that, built the platform from scratch. We're the only entity in the world that makes the tools to cover all 20,000 genes. And we did it by what we wanted to predict, which was drug targets, because we want our predictions to be actionable. What's different? All the tests that are on the market today are for one gene, one RNA, or a few that are measured one by one. Ample was able to eliminate a lot of noise in the system, and the mathematicians listening know what I mean. You do things by groups. You eliminate random chance noise. Think about looking for cars down the highway. if you're looking for a group of all red cars, they become much more observable than if you're looking for one car. So we grouped all 20,000 genes by drug targets. Then a new sample is asking, do you have enough genes expressed in, for example, the group that delineates tumor necrosis factor, which is a target for rheumatoid arthritis, Humira, Enbrel, the other drugs, and have enough to make a statistical call. Yes, Steve, your TNF is abnormal, and therefore you may be a good candidate for this FDA-approved drug. So it's different because we grouped the genes. That also gave us the ability to validate across disease areas relatively quickly over a matter of years, because we had finished and locked down the platform where we reduced 20,000 possible RNAs, genes expressed, to the minimal number of units that define the immune system and inflammation. Then every disease is a certain number of groups. So for example, lupus, Lugene is 32 groups of genes that defines the universe. Why do we need the complicated map? When you're dealing with numbers that big and you're looking at test and validation sets in trillions of data points, we at first used machine learning, which is really complicated statistics, to put it mildly. Then when you layer on neural nets, so much more like our brain works, now it's predictive AI. And there's white box and black box algorithms. Everything that Ample does is white box. That means that anyone with the training could understand our algorithms. Now, certainly we're a company, so they're trade secrets. You'd have to be, under NDA. That's the who, where, why, when, and how.
That's great. And so we've been hearing, coming from the community of Peter Attia, I think you mentioned him in Drive, and also there's that other guy who I'm now forgetting his name, who does work similar to Peter Attia. I'll think of that in a second. But coming out of that world, there's kind of these very general learnings about optimal health and wellness. The very general learnings are exercise, sleep adequately, have a good diet, and low stress. And actually, I think they're missing something that you can bring to the table, which is low inflammation as well. Figure out what's causing inflammation in your life. And perhaps if you have a modern life, there's certain things that are causing you more inflammation than you would have had 50 or 100 years ago, and address that as well. No one is talking about that. I think that's an intriguing extra element to the mix. And what's funny and crazy is that the people listening to Peter Attia are all very competent professionals. You tell them these things. How easy is it for them to do these simple things? It's not easy at all. Hey, I have an idea. Why don't you go from 6 hours sleep to 8 hours sleep? Probably almost none of them could do that. And so what's simple can be very hard to do. And what we really all want is just a pill that gets us there. And so we don't want to have to do intermittent fasting and hour-long walks or something.
Although the intermittent fasting, I would say if we had done a well-gene blood test before and after, I would hypothesize that just doing that has put you into a lower inflammatory state. Now, right now, physicians can order a CRP blood test or an ESR. These are 50-year-old tests. They very bluntly tell you inflammation, but by the time you're positive for that, your inflammation has been going on a long time. CRP is made by your liver when your liver senses inflammation. So by the time your liver is crying, and the CRP positive has been going on for some time. ESR is the blood test where if you have a lot of inflammatory proteins in your blood, the cells fall more slowly. So, these are very old tests. What Ample has done is by categorizing all the RNAs and genes that are expressed when your DNA opens up. I drink coffee every morning. Caffeine induces RNAs off and on. And we quantitate that from a blood or a biopsy sample. WellGene is at the proof of concept stage. We're raising money to take it and develop the data to take it through certification, to bring it through the market. The first iteration will be a yes-no inflammation, which is much more than we have right now. We see it being integrated with digital health and our ring, mobile apps, watches. Actually, we did a clinical trial a few years ago where we were integrating all of that sleep, diet, exercise, health, all collected by digital devices with a blood test. You could get an early warning, and not only that, but get specific action items. As you said, in our modern society, we want to know, what can we do about it? Is it something I can order on Amazon, like krill oil or curcumin? Is it something I need to talk to my doctor about? For example, cardiology, about a year ago, there was a landmark paper in Lancet, which is a very famous journal, talking about that even individuals that got their lipids to an extremely low level with statin were still having cardiovascular events. And that was because of high inflammation. So if we're able to detect inflammation early and know what to do about it, do I need to take a biologic against IL-6 or against TNF? Or in the longevity world, is there an actionable reason to take rapamycin, which a lot of people are taking right now for longevity, which reduces inflammation at the heart of it, but does have some immunodeficiency side effects having it.
Yeah, thank you. So I was hoping you could tell us a little more about black box versus explainable white box. And so I heard before the pandemic, I heard a mid-level FDA official made some statement roughly saying something like that this new AI technology that comes to us, it needs to be explainable, which and then actually since then I've heard another mid-level FDA official has walked that back a little bit. You know, we'd like to see stuff that is outstanding and has outstanding results and is not explainable as well. And I haven't seen any high-level pronouncements on this topic yet. But there was a moral dilemma, hypothetical moral dilemma was presented that said, you know, let's say that we're talking about pathologists reading slides of biopsies of potentially cancerous areas. And a pathologist gets a diagnosis right 97% of the time, and an explainable AI gets the diagnosis right 98% of the time, and an unexplainable AI gets the result right 99% of the time. This is hypothetical. And which would you go with? And then the dilemma is, people are going to die of cancer no matter what in all three scenarios. But if it's the third scenario of the unexplainable AI that was slightly more correct and someone dies of cancer, you can't figure out why, and you can't fix it if it was unexplainable. And this is the dilemma. And then of course we also live in a lot of uncertain information that seldom is clearly presented, as that hypothetical example was. Why are there any black boxes to begin with, and what's the explainable white box, and how has your product come to be explainable white box?
These are all great questions that are being actively discussed in Congress and at the FDA, is also worldwide. The EU came out very early and was very firm that all algorithms used in healthcare in the European Union need to be explainable and white box. Now, the scientific method has been around for a long time and is very unemotional, and it is all based on data. I haven't seen any studies that the results are what you just surmised, so I can't comment on that directly. What I can say is we're world's experts in machine learning and predictive AI. From our standpoint, there's no reason that an algorithm cannot be white box and explainable at some level. You may use the completely black box as part of your test method to get to your final algorithm. but that is part of the scientific method and part of the process. I think part of healthcare is responsibility to the end user, which is the person living with the disease who is paying for this test, the insurers that are paying for the test, the healthcare system. And there's always going to be corporate influence into any decisions. I'll be bold and say maybe there's some corporate advantage. I mean, it's pretty obvious there's corporate advantage if you're not required to actually reveal, what is, in your algorithm, even to a regulatory agency. So I'll leave it as a question that's still to be debated. But to be very clear, Ample's genomic platform of RNA analytics and predictive AI is explainable and white box. And from our standpoint, we haven't seen any of the real world examples that you hypothesized before.
And so, by the way, apparently all of the major AI engines, ChatGPT and Google Gemini and X Grok and others, these are unexplainable. So you start with source data, huge amounts of source data. You generate an AI model with weights, and then once you have an AI model with weights, you could theoretically delete all the source data. And then if you ask why the weights are the way they are, and to go back to show the source data, you can't get there. It's like going from code into machine language. You can't get back from machine language into
So
code.
I'll clarify, all the examples you gave are generative AI, which by very nature, generative AI is black box. The question on the table being debated in Congress and in the FDA is, should algorithms that cannot be explained to a regulatory agency, to physicians and patients, be something that people want to support in their healthcare system? What Ample uses, what a lot of analytic healthcare digital health companies are using, predictive AI, which are test and validation sets, either supervised or unsupervised. Unsupervised is a black box type of algorithm. But that goes back to just understanding the very definitions at hand. Probably not so bad that the algorithm on my phone that's predicting words to me is black box. Do I really care if I understand how it's predicting words to me? If it's something that my life is dependent on, the EU came out very strongly that they require all healthcare AI predictions to be white box. It's still an open question in Congress and at the FDA.
And there's a joke about, there's been a lot of discussion of using Chat GPT for Dr. Chat GPT for patients to chat and get a diagnosis or whatever. And the joke is that it hallucinates, it makes stuff up, and it can't explain itself. Other than that, though, it's great.
I think enough said, as a friend of mine would say.
So we have a question from Patricia in the audience, which is, what are the key regulatory areas / critical areas to work with from day one with FDA regulators when a company is thinking of developing LDTs, laboratory diagnostic tests? So for LDTs, what are the key regulatory areas or the critical areas to work with the FDA from day one on?
It's a great question. And for others in the audience, an LDT means a laboratory developed test. This is a blood or a biopsy that is provided out of one single laboratory. This is very different from a blood test, for example, that Quest or LabCorp provides nationwide. Very recently, the rules are in flux about these laboratory tests. Up to this point, they've been governed by something called a CLIA amendment, which basically you need to use a third-party lab to demonstrate that your test does what it says it does. And there's a variety of steps, and Medicare providers in California, that's MolDX, that you go back and forth with your clinical validity and utility data. And then you get a reimbursement code for Medicare and insurance to pay. The FDA has come out with potential guidance that is taking potentially all of these tests and now putting them under the guidance of the FDA, which has some very positive attributes. With anything with the FDA, they're always open to pre-meetings to discuss what you're proposing, to get feedback before you submit your application. I would highly encourage anybody thinking about doing that to take advantage of that, whether it's a medical device, which laboratory developed tests may be in the future considered medical devices, or whether it's a drug you're bringing to the market. The FDA really does want to work with companies and to provide guidance early on to give the best chance of success in the long run.
Great. And another question, as a scientist, what are diseases, therapeutic areas that are less crowded that you would recommend to look at from the molecular target approach that have promise? Any uncrowded areas?
Excellent question. As I mentioned, I was at the National Institutes of Health during the decade of the Human Genome Project, the 2000s. That was really the inspiration for myself and my co-founder, Dr. Peter Lipsky, who is one of the directors of the NIH, to found our company. We knew that the majority of the first use case scenarios would be in oncology. And part of that is because one tumor has one mutation, so approachable to target from a drug standpoint. Whereas autoimmune disease, as I mentioned, many targets that could be abnormal in the disease that we work in. The universe of lupus turns out to be 8 subgroups or endotypes, even across all ancestries. So I'd say there's a lot of opportunity and work to be done in the autoimmune space. There are over 50 million Americans that have autoimmune diseases. There's a small number of drugs that are actually proved to treat them. And there's, a wide open in terms of disease management. One big difference between oncology and autoimmune disease, great news is with our healthcare, good healthcare, somebody may have a lifetime of 20 to 25 years after diagnosis. That means great opportunity for drugs, great opportunity for both diagnosing tests as well as monitoring.
That's great. Well, thank you. We're out of time, and so thank you so much for coming on the show. And do you have anything else you wanted to pass on to our audience?
Well, Steve, I had a great time talking today over the whole span of topics. I'll just leave everybody with the idea of managing inflammation, figuring out in your own life how to reduce inflammation. In the future, there'll be blood and biopsy tests that will help do that, like the Wellgene blood test that Ample is bringing to market. Low inflammation is key to a long and healthy and productive life, and it's something that I wish for us all.
Thank you, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Have a great night.
So you've been listening to Digital Health Investor Talk with host Stephen Wardell, and special thanks to our guest, Emery Grammer. We are publishing this show as an episode in the Digital Health Investor Talk show. Subscribe on Apple and Spotify, and don't forget to rate us. The next show will be on Wednesday, July 31st, with Gil Blander of Inside Tracker on the topic of Live Long Enough to Live Forever. Thanks and goodbye.